Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Grim Tutors, your one-stop shop for all things Magic the Gathering. I'm Colton, also known as Pez.
And I'm Oblivion. So, what are we talking about today?
Today, we're going to be venturing into the wondrous world of Pauper Commander.
Ooh, that sounds fun. A little bit of commandy dandy, a little bit of the Pauper vibe.
Mm-hmm.
We will have some people that are from the Pauper Rules Committee to help us discuss this, and I think that they're waiting for us.
Let's see.
Yeah, so my name is Dave. Online, people know me as Alkadron. I have been playing Magic since '95. I've been playing Pauper EDH since 2013. I got into it because even in 2013, I was kind of over the power creep that was happening in all the rares for like very commander-centric product, and I wanted something that was a little more balanced in terms of the field and also like accessibility. That's the basics. I like all the colors. Been doing this a while.
My name is Derek. That's what I go by anywhere that I'm at on the internet. I just use my name. Notably with lowercase d, we don't capitalize that around here.
Mm-hmm.
I've been playing Magic about as long as Dave, about 95. Commander since about maybe 2013, and then Pauper Commander shortly after. Like Dave said, as time has marched on, like he and I think are both very much the same mind that like Commander's gotten a lot about just like excess in a lot of ways, right? In terms of like game objects, whether it be creature tokens, artifact tokens. Now there's like, you got your junks, your treasures, your foods, your clues, all these things, and it just creates these very kind of incomprehensible board states in a lot of games. And sort of what drew me to Pauper Commander initially, it wasn't like a coined official term back then. Was just the fact that it was very functional nuts and bolts Magic with cards that just do very. You read the card, reading the card explains the card, right? Like, just on my desk
They
here.
say that, but
They say it. Well, like card like on my desk right now, I have a card Sylvan Ranger. It's a 2-mana 1/1. When it enters your church library for a basic land, put it into your hand. It's like this is a very commonplace kind of templating. It's very simple. Just you play the card, it does a thing, and then you move on with your life. It's a lot like limited, like sealed in the way that you have to like care about things on the battlefield and cards in hand and other resources. So that's kind of what drew me to the format initially. And then from there, I started writing for a website called pdhhomebase.com, which is kind of like the central hub for the format on the internet now. And then when it came time to like reckon with the fact that the format had grown and needed like kind of a guiding hand at the front of it, I offered to be on the first incarnations of the rules committee, and that's where I've been ever since. Everything from like banning Mystic Romanistic Study, like I was a part of that vote. I did not vote to ban them. I was one of 2 people who did not, but it doesn't matter. I've since come around as an example. And like when backgrounds were released in Baldur's Gate, coming to the decision to not allow the common ones in the command zone, keeping the command zone as a fully uncommon rarity thing. Like these sorts of decisions, it became very clear that in terms of growing the format and pushing it forward, it was important to just have like a vision and a guiding principle, and that's kind of where we do our thing. It's kind of where we live. So that's kind of the long and short of it, where I come from and what I do.
So we have talked previously on our show about Pauper, and we've talked previously on our show about Commander. So is it safe to assume that it's kind of the amalgamation of both? Is there anything kind of differing? Explain to me like the elevator pitch for this is what it is.
I think of it as a sub-format of Commander. I think that it's more, to me, it feels like a Commander game with a modified rule set, much more than it feels like a Pauper game with a modified rule set, because it is much like Commander. You're starting with an edited life total. You have Commander damage. You have a 100 card singleton deck. You have a commander in the command zone. So like all of those things are just taken straight from Commander. We add a couple extra rules to that. So instead of your commander being any legendary creature, your commander is any uncommon creature. So commander's like legendary is to PDH's uncommonness. And then every other card in your deck, the entire other 99 or 98 if you're using partners, have to have existed at common at some point in paper or in MTGO.
Okay.
So it is effectively like Commander with the Pauper card set.
Yeah, like we pull a card pool from 60 card Pauper. It's pretty, pretty identical, except we haven't gotten rid of like sticker cards and those sorts of things. Yeah. Those are legal in Pauper Commander. It's kind of like taking Pauper accessibility and like functionality and then a Commander ethos, right? It's still fundamentally like a casual format play for the same things that we want to get out of a game of Commander otherwise, you know. It's just we're doing it with cards that scratch a different itch for us. So like that's kind of the big thing that Dave hit on, is like accessibility is like the big part of it, especially as we kind of time marches on and cards get more expensive and everything's a staple, you know. You have to have your 20 functionally identical Eternal Witnesses or whatever, whoever knows what's going on.
Not
But
me.
with Pauper Commander, it's just about taking your draft deck, turning it into a Commander deck. Basically, it's a common through line. People just find the sweet limited archetypes, build decks around them, and play Commander. And it's no more simple than, or no more difficult than that, no more complicated.
With the Commander, so any uncommon, so it does not have to be legendary, but it's fine if it is.
Correct.
Okay, perfect.
So just a quick side note on that, like I don't know exactly when the format started, because it sort of came up kind of organically in a lot of different places at once. Like lots of people in the 2011 to 2013 era were kind of having this idea, like, I like Commander, but like these cards are terrible to play against. Like, I would love Commander that didn't involve Winter Orb and Psych Rift. Like, let's make that a thing. And like lots of people just sort of house ruled like commons only Commander variants. So no one really knows exactly like when it started. There was no like centralized unit at the time. At the time when lots of people were having this idea, there were, I think, grand total maybe like 18 uncommon legends. All of them were from the set Legends, and I don't know if you've ever looked through those cards, but they're like 7 mana vanilla 6/4.
Yeah.
Or
like OG Kamigawa.
Right, yeah, there's like a one uncommon
Kamigawa
Samurai in Kamigawa in Champions, I think.
Yeah.
Kamigawa had some cards that would flip into Legends.
Oh no, it's a Nagao Bound by Honor. You can,
Oh,
you, can
Nagao,
fact,
yeah.
you can fact check me
Forgot
on
about
that
Nagao.
one.
Yeah, okay. Forgot about Nagao. So
But yeah,
there's
there's
Nagao.
functionally none.
There was I think 4 from Homelands and then like a dozen from Legends. And every single one of them was objectively terrible.
Yeah.
And so like
It was a necessity.
at the time
thing.
it made
Exactly.
what?
It was a necessity thing at that point.
Oh.
Because you just
Yeah,
didn't
like-
have choices.
If you wanted to have an interesting effect in the command zone, you couldn't you either couldn't limit yourself to uncommon or couldn't limit yourself to legend.
Gotcha.
And I think most people, like as they were sort of inventing this format, chose to not limit themselves to legends, and that opened up like that's what Derek mentioned. People were kind of like picking up their draft deck. Like when you played a really sweet night with your draft deck and you had this one signpost uncommon that like brought the whole thing together and really enhanced this archetype, you could say, I wish that was a commander. Now it can be. Like it can be your commander for this pile of 99 commons, and you can like the half your deck is just what you drafted, like those commons. That can be the start of your deck. It opened it up to a lot of like really cool uncommons, like all the guild mages from Ravnica, all of like the kindred guys from the first Innistrad, like the Stormkirk guy.
There's a lot of really interesting things that you can find on commons. Like there's a lot of deck types and things you can play around that you just don't get legendary creatures for. Like one of my favorite examples is a card. Oh goodness, the name escapes me, but it's a 5/4 from Eldritch Moon for 8 generic mana. It's an Eldrazi. It has an emerge cost of 5 blue-green, and then when you emerge it, you basically just put a permanent on top of its owner's library. But there's no like.
Is that the Vineweed guy? Vineweed Lashweed?
Lashweed Lurker, that's what it's called.
Lashweed Lurker. That was close.
Yeah, there's no like emerge commander in Commander. Like there's no legendary emerge creature really. Well, now there is. They printed one in Modern Horizons 3, but there were none prior to that, and let alone one in Simic. And so like what I did with that card is just like a really cool like Simic aristocracy style deck where you're just like self-sacrificing your own creatures to emerge out Lashweed Lurker. There's other things with like exploit creatures where you can sacrifice your things to get effects. There's a lot of creatures that when they die, they draw you a card, they get you a land. So it's like a deck that you couldn't really have in Commander, but you can in this format because the cards just are designed differently and for different things. And yeah, and like to kind of touch on what Dave was talking about, imposing restrictions on yourself as a deck builder is something that everybody that plays Commander does. And that's precisely where this format came from. Like the earliest traces of it exist on like old MTG Salvation forums from like 2012, 2013. And you can kind of look at those and kind of see how things took shape. A lot of the way that things are now goes back to those initial attempts to kind of codify the format. There are a couple serious attempts that have been made earlier, like a decade ago, that didn't go anywhere. At around 2017, 2018 or so, did we actually like put forth like what we consider to be like the official rule set for the format, like market it on that basis, and kind of just really try and grow it from that standpoint, rather than, you know, just saying this is my fun house rule that I do with my friends, which is what kind of it had been up to that point.
As someone who started playing Magic, playing Commander in 2021, it's crazy because when you say, oh, there were like 17 legends and they all sucked, I'm like, couldn't be me. That's just so interesting, because now, like, I remember Outlaws of Thunder Junction, which came out earlier this year. A vast majority of their legendaries were uncommon. Like, there was only, if it felt like, at least from the ones that I can recall from memory, there's more of them that I can think of that were uncommon versus like mythic or rare, which is interesting.
And that's been a really great thing for the format, just simply because like it's a really great on-ramp for Commander players to join this format, is because you still get to play with your legendary creatures, you still get to like hone in on those things that you value and that resonate with you from Commander, but just kind of shift the context a little bit. They hadn't really done anything like that prior to Dominaria back in 2018, I think, when that set came out. There were very, very, very few uncommon legendaries. I think that was like the first set where they really started like pushing that idea more, because it was a Legendary Matters set and they just like needed them for limited. So that's where we kind of got the first big batch, and then from there, you know, it's, you know, 17 legendary creatures every set now, you know.
There's so many. Good, bad, or otherwise, there's many.
I think there were like a couple ideas that sort of collided in the last few years, and that, like, one of them is that like when you're designing a set for limited, you have to have these like signpost uncommons. So like there has to be, like, if you want the red black like archetype in a draft to be like life loss, you have to have a bunch of like red black cards that will facilitate or give you payoffs for life loss. And like there have been those signpost uncommons in limited sets for decades. Now that Commander has become like wildly popular in the last decade, like someone somewhere had the idea, like, what if we just staple this signpost uncommon onto a legendary body, and then like it can serve this function in a draft, and like whoever really, really likes this archetype or like doing this thing, they can have that as their commander as well. And like we're sort of like checking two boxes with this one card, and like for us in Pauper Commander, that's been like a huge asset to like not only to on-ramp people, but just like to express deck creativity and play around in all of these different spaces.
That's a good point, because I didn't think about in the on-ramp scenario that it could be confusing if you are going from a commander-centric lifestyle, as it were, to have to like turn off your it has to be legendary brain. So now that there are things that you can actually use that would be good, it just makes the shift a little bit easier.
Yeah, it's a lot easier, especially because like a lot of the non-legendary commanders are very like non-prescriptive. They just like kind of give you some tools and say figure it out, whereas the signpost cards really guide you in those initial first several decks you want to make in the format. So it's been like tremendously useful. It's really funny, like when new sets come out and cards are added to the format, because we get new cards just like Commander gets new cards every release, right? But you know, the difference is like with reprint sets, because whereas like a reprint set won't add anything new to Commander, they shift rarities on a lot of those cards every set. So we're always getting new commanders, new commons, and they're all oftentimes like very powerful and kind of add new things to the format. A lot of novel effects, like for example, they downshifted cards like Is It Charm, which is like a really great Is It modal spell, like a very unique effect. Commander Masters, they downshifted like Tashar, Ancestor's Apostle, to an uncommon. So that opened up an entirely different like new archetype for the format. And like Eudora, Grave Gardener.
RIP and regular Pauper, all that glitters. You were great for
all
the 5 seconds.
All that glitters is huge.
We still have it here.
We got Dread Return and
Dread Return,
Generous Gift.
Yeah, a lot of really cool cards.
Those were massive shifts.
So it's not always just like, you know, draft chaff that enters the format. It's oftentimes like we get a lot of special treats every time they put out a new reprint set, because those limited formats are so unique that they demand certain things different from a standard legal set, right? So they have a lot more leeway to play around with what moves up in rarity, what moves down. Because I mean, downshifts get the most you know, airplay, but upshifts are just as important. Like if a creature that had only ever been common gets moved into an uncommon, then now that's a legal commander and you can play with that. Like Priest of Titania was a big one with Modern Horizons 3.
I was gonna say, Derek, do you know anyone who likes elves?
I am the elves guy in Pauper Commander. I'll take credit for that now, but that's what I'm known for. Priest of Titania has just been a common for, you know, 15 years.
Ever.
And now we can play within the command zone, and it's super sweet. So we get a lot of little special stuff.
Did you mean 26?
What, the card was from 90...
98?
No, 15. 26.
98 was 15 years ago?
I don't
mean,
know
I'm
math.
on
You're the
board.
math guy.
I love that.
You're the
No,
math
I
guy.
98
understand.
was
The
15 years
80s
ago.
was
Ship it.
20 years ago.
Yeah.
All
The
the
80s
time.
was 20 years ago.
I'm sorry. I'm old.
98 was 2 years ago.
Time means nothing to me. I look. The only math I need to be able to do is how large my might of the masses is going to make my heritage shifted. Okay,
That's fair.
that's the only math I need to learn.
It's
But
good.
yeah.
It's good math.
So that's another like really great thing about the format is that not only has design started giving us like legendary uncommons, but it also has given us through really great limited formats like new cards shifting up and down in rarity.
So we kind of touched on the specific rules and maybe a couple of ban cards. So I think it would be helpful if we broke down the differences. I know that life total, commander damage, banned cards.
Well, as far as like life totals and stuff, and Dave, I'll let you tackle the banned list. You love talking about those two cards. Life totals are different. So in Pauper Commander, much like Commander, it's a multiplayer format. Everyone starts with 30 life, first of all. It's a little bit lower just to kind of accommodate for power level of the cards. And not only that, but also it's had a great side effect of just like making aggressive decks a little bit more prevalent in the format. Like aggro decks are a lot more present than they would otherwise be in like normal Commander, just because they are much more able to hit 30 life rather than 40 life threshold. We have Commander damage at 16 rather than 21. Again, just to accommodate like an overall like lower, flatter power level on the cards. And it also makes the games move at a good clip too. Most games you'll find take between like hour and a half, unless someone's being particularly grindy, difficult, and not willing to lose the game. Those sorts of things that naturally pop up. But yeah, so 30 life, 16 commander damage, and then obviously everything in your deck has to be a common. Command Zone is uncommon, the rest of the deck is commons, and that's pretty much it. Dave, you want to tackle some banned cards? What cards do we have banned in the format?
Yeah. So I mean, there are cards that are banned in every format just because they were printed in a different time and they're low-key kind of offensive. And all of those are still banned in Pauper Commander. Like we're not gonna mess with those. The two cards that we have very specifically banned in this format are Rhystic Study. Hopefully everyone knows what that does because it is the most irritating card on the planet. And its little sister, Mystic Remora, which does almost the same thing. These are both blue enchantments that trigger whenever an opponent casts a spell, and they let you draw a card unless your opponent pays. Unless whoever cast the spell pays some mana. Interestingly, both of these cards were printed at common, and when they were printed, Mystic Remora first came to us in Ice Age 95. Rhystic Study, I think, came to us in Prophecy.
Yep.
Part of the Masks block in the late 90s was Prophecy. Nailed it.
Yeah, that's like 2000 or 2001, something like that. 2000,
yeah, a couple of years ago. When they were printed, they were trash bulk commons. Like no one wanted them. They were trash. They were chaff because in a 1v1 format they are not good cards. If you only have one opponent who's going to be casting spells, can decide for themselves whether or not they're going to pay for this. They're perfectly reasonable commons. They are not powerful. They only sort of became popular when multiplayer Commander sort of came into existence years after they were printed. They're much too powerful now to be commons. Both of them have been reprinted in various products at rare or mythic, which is within the power level and the context of Pauper. Like that's where they belong. They really don't belong in a Pauper multiplayer format, so we got rid of them.
Does that make sense?
So you guys don't follow the Pauper ban list per se as the 60 card format. You guys curate your own.
You can play Gush, you can play Gixprobe, you can play
ATOG.
anything.
Yeah, I
all
mean,
of that's legal.
Yeah.
Just like playing a 100 card deck and only having one copy, it really just diminishes the explosiveness of these cards. Like these are very powerful when they hit the battlefield, but like they're not going to dominate a format. You're not going to see them in half the games you play. Cranial plating is still legal in this format. Cranial ram, which was pre-banned, I think, from Modern Horizons 3 into Pauper.
Sure was.
That's legal in this format. I mean, you can do that stuff. The range of ways to mitigate the damage of those cards is so much broader here than it is in 60 card Pauper. So we just don't really see a need to get rid of them right now. When it comes to banning cards in our format, like we take it a little bit differently. In this format, just because of the power level of all the cards, it's so much more flat that the competitive end of the spectrum and the supremely casual end of the spectrum exist on a much more even playing field. Like you can bring a competitive deck to a casual table and you'll just, I mean, it'll be like a normal game of Magic. You'll just win with your infinite combo at some point, but you still need to play a game of Magic to get to that point. Like there's not a million super efficient tutors to get all your things and just win the game. A game of Magic still needs to be played and everything is very interactable.
Also, the combo you're assembling is probably 4 cards, not just like 2.
Right. So like there's a lot more fail safes in terms of just like playing casual decks against competitive decks because they all kind of are doing very similar things. It's just they go about them in slightly different ways. So when we look at how we govern the format in terms of like card bannings and things like that, we can kind of take into account a little bit more of how things impact things competitively, even though we are a casual format first. And that's like one of the big reasons why like Rhystic Study and Mystic Remora got banned is while they do a lot of damage on the casual end of the spectrum just by like making the game insufferable trouble to play, right? Like being constantly asked, do you pay the 1 is really annoying. I'm sure anybody who's played Commander with Smothering Tithe knows exactly how that feels. We just kind of got rid of that on that reason. It just like was very disruptive to casual games, and then it was warping like very, very hard the competitive decks. Like if you weren't playing blue decks with those 2 cards, you were at such a disadvantage. It would come down and the game would immediately become about managing that permanent. And since it's been gone, a lot more decks have entered like the more competitive metagame. It's very healthy. People are able to kind of bring whatever they want to. I mean, there are periodic tournaments that we have online for the format. People bring all kinds of stuff to those things, you know, and are successful doing such an insanely broad range of stuff in this format. It's been very successful.
That's awesome. So if I was a Commander player or even a Pauper player or a something else player, what would you say would be things or reasons, benefits to me like deciding to start playing Pauper Commander? Like what are those little things in your brain that's like, this is why you would want to do this?
So the first one that immediately comes to mind is kind of like my big sticking point is accessibility. The format is cheap. You're not constantly like having to shell out all of this cash every new release to update all of your decks. It's very easy to maintain a broad roster of decks. It's very easy to build a broad roster of decks. Most decks, like if you're playing with cards like, you know, Snuff Out, whatever expensive commons are out there, I don't even know anymore. You may be spending somewhere between like 30
dead counter spells.
Yeah, snow covered lands, like these sorts of things. You might be paying like $30 to $40 for like a deck. If you don't care about any of that, it's very easy to just do it for like $5, $10. And then that's a deck that you can just keep on playing. It's not going to get power crept because rate that we get like cards that are powered to like the degree of an outlier is so rare. Your deck is going to be playable, and when you upgrade it, you're spending $1 on a handful of commons. So it's very easy to just like stay in it. Card accessibility is never a problem. Commons it's so easy to get a hold of anything that you might need. It's just been such a great way to brew. Like I'm constantly building decks, so like I don't have to keep shelling out money to build more, which is tremendously helpful to me. Accessibility is kind of like the biggest thing in my opinion about like in terms of when I sell the format to somebody else. Spend $20 on this card, you can spend $20 for a whole deck that you'll need to spend 50 cents to update maybe every year or so.
I have additional thoughts there. For me, I think the biggest draw is that there are no individual game-breaking bomb, like completely state warping cards. Like you can get game-breaking, game state warping effects. You have to assemble those piece by piece using synergy from cards that work together. A lot more thought goes into deck building, and there's a lot more intentionality. Like you can't just say like, I'm gonna build an elf deck. What are the 50 best cards with the word elf in the text box? I'm gonna put all of them in the deck, and then a Wandering Throne, and like bam, I'm done. $500, give me an elf deck. You have to very carefully like select cards that are going to work really well together from among a much more limited pool of cards, and it's more of a challenge to like come up with those really impactful effects, which you can still build from a collection of cards instead of just having it stapled onto like one single Psych Rift that does everything you want it to immediately. You can build your own Psych Rift with like a Hermit Crab and a Banishing Knack, but like you have to work for it, and I love that. The other part of like big draw for the format for me isn't something that I want to lead with, because it's like a push away from Commander rather than being a draw to Pauper. It's just that there's no Psych Rift. There's
of all
no
the
Psych
cards,
Rift.
is that one specifically and particularly?
Psych Rift has scarred me personally. I'm sure that there's
I
other
could not
cards
tell.
But yeah, so like we don't have any of those like kind of cards that make people roll their eyes, really. I mean, like I'm sure you could find the cards that make people roll their eyes in this format vary from player to player. It's usually something completely innocuous that they just got blown out by one time, which is great. Like that's the kind of thing you want. But as a result of having so much more intentionality with your deck and your card choices and everything being much more specific and tailored to like what you are trying to accomplish, the gameplay ends up being a lot better just because like everything matters. The cards that you have on the battlefield are like resources that are like very, very meaningful, and so like having spells to protect those things become really important in a way that like in normal Commander, maybe you just have ways to just scoop your entire graveyard back into your hand at some point. You know, there's a lot of things like Vines of Vastwood to, you know, give your things hexproof, or Tameo Safekeeping, Lauren's Escape. Like all these 1-mana protection spells are very, very popular. You find them in a lot of decks just because a lot of times people just need to protect their commander because it is a rarity step ahead of the rest of your deck, right? It's going to be more powerful, it's gonna be the most powerful card in your deck most of the time. So like the dynamics are a lot different, like, which is why it ends up feeling a lot more like limited, because like the creatures you have on the battlefield, what you do with those things, like what you attack with, what you block with, what's tapped, what's not, how many cards you have in your hand when you don't have access to things that can just like refill you up to 15 cards, you know, you're drawing maybe like 1 or 2 extra at a time due to various effects. So it's all much more like manageable from just like a bandwidth perspective. You just don't have the decision paralysis of trying to sequence your hand of 15 cards. You just have like the cards in your hand, cards on the battlefield, you draw a card a turn, and then you draw an extra one here or there, generate other card advantage in other ways through some kind of like intricate onboard engine.
You don't rely on card advantage to be able to move yourself ahead, because that's not like the primary. There aren't really cards that make that a primary function, need, etc.
And the cards that do like just draw you heaps of cards are ones that you need to like set up for and like build your deck around, like Kindred decks with Distant Melody. It's one where you draw a card for each creature you control of a specific type. Something like Rush of Knowledge is a 5-mana sorcery. You draw cards equal to the highest mana value of permanents you control. So there's ways to like,
my favorite.
Yeah, like with Lashwood Lurker, right? It's an 8-mana 5/4 Eldrazi. You just you emerge it onto the battlefield, and you draw 8 cards with your Rush of Knowledge. And those things, because they're so rare, they feel so cool when they happen.
Because you really did it, like you.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a lot of money.
I assembled my things.
Right, exactly. Like if I'm drawing, like 6 cards off of my Distant Melody in my Marrow Reachery Merfolk deck, then that's like the big win, and then I die from there because everyone's scared of me now. Those things carry the weight that they should, if you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like drawing that many cards is really cool, and no one else is going to be able to do it except you at that table, because your deck is built to do that.
And at that point, if you're paying like 6 mana to draw maybe at most, if in a perfect world, 8 cards.
Yeah.
At that point, like, just get it. I want to see.
Hats off.
But luckily at common, like even outside of just like raw card draw, there's a lot of ways to just jimmy some card advantage here and there. You have adventure creatures, which are 2 spells on 1 card. You have spells with flashback. You have spells with madness. You've got all these other like kind of mechanics that have existed throughout Magic's history that just go a little bit to shore up the card advantage issue. So it's really cool, like finding all of those different pieces and how they intersect to build your deck.
And I would say, just as someone who I've built like 3 Pauper Commander decks and played probably the same amount of games, I will say there's 2 things that I find to be very different, just as someone who has not been around the block very much. Number 1 is that it flexes your deck building muscle in such a new and interesting way, because it completely removes the, okay, I'm going to play blue, so here are all of the cards in blue that I need, and here's this list of mana rocks, and here's the list of, all the lands that I'm going to play, and all of that kind of stuff. So that kind of goes out the window.
It gets rid of that list of the 55 cards that are includes into every single deck, and it's like, I get to be creative with these 35 cards.
Exactly. The like synergies of your deck build, they're so important. But what's really cool is that you mentioned a lot how the synergies and what things can do feel a lot like a limited format. But when you build a Pauper Commander deck, it does not feel like you have to build a commander deck around one set thing, and you can go and find cards from any time in Magic that still work and feel good, that were just long forgotten little fellas, and now you get to play with them, which is also nice too, because it feels like, I don't know, kind of like the animal shelter. Like I'm giving a home to like wayward 2-cent Magic cards that no one cares about from 1999.
Also, it's like you also get to see the beautiful art that are on these cards.
That's true.
And you get to appreciate it at that level.
Yeah.
Instead of just being like, yep.
Yeah, and like flipping through your stuff.
There's still a lot of like looking for that one perfect card and then just like finding it, and then you're just like, oh man, everyone's in for it now, like that feeling still very much exists, and like it can be very daunting for a newer player like yourself to kind of like look at the entire breadth of Magic's history, at these commons that you've never been troubled to look at before, right? You're just kind of like going into everything like kind of cold, and it can be a lot. It just takes time to, like I said, like that's why it's been so great with these signpost cards, because you can just build a deck out of the last maybe 6 to 8 standard sets worth of cards, and it's perfectly functional. You'll win games, and then like as you become more familiar with what the format's about, what it feels like, what you want to be doing, then you kind of start looking back a little bit, finding mechanics. Oh, this mechanic was actually in a set 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Let's see what was back there, like that kind of stuff. It just kind of piggybacks from one thing into another.
If they had not been printing so many uncommon legendaries and I started doing this and I had to pick an uncommon creature, otherwise it was going to be bonk, I would not know where to start, because how many uncommon creatures are there?
Thousands.
Tens of thousands. Like that point it's like, what do you even do?
Yeah, that's why it's important. Like when I talk to people about the format for the first time or am like pitching it, my first recommendation is to look at the last 3 or 4 sets, pick an uncommon legendary or uncommon like draft card and build a deck around that to start. It's so much easier, and the cards now are they're just very well designed. You'll get everything that you need to build a perfectly functional deck. And then if you like it, great. We'll keep building decks, keep looking at cards, keep finding things that you want to do and build those decks. And if you don't, then go back to Commander. It's still there and it's still great, you know. So no loser, you know. Anybody who knows me knows that I love to go to great lengths to just draw 1 extra card on each of my turns.
That's winning.
So I'm on board with that.
Baby. So if people wanted to find out more about Pauper Commander, about the rules, where are some places and resources and things that you would suggest?
The first place I'd suggest is pdhhomebase.com. That's kind of like what we've positioned as kind of a landing page for the format on the internet. It's got the rules, it's got links to like online communities, it's got kind of
facts
stuff. Yep, it's got FAQ, it's got the actual comprehensive rules document, it's got stuff about us and kind of where we are and who we are. Dave, what are some great online communities that exist for Pauper Commander, and where can people find those?
If you really want to watch people play PDH live on Twitch, you can check out the PDH Pals. If you want to get involved in the PDH tournament scene, you can head to there's a Discord called Sanctuary PDH. There's a Discord called the Common Connoisseurs that also has a YouTube channel that's helmed by a guy named Ryan. He does outstanding work. There's cpdh.guide is a website maintained by a gentleman named Clay, where he tracks data from all the competitive games that he can get his hands on.
Clay's also on
Clay's also on the rules committee. Ryan, I mentioned, is a part of the advisory committee. Sanctuary, also the guy who runs that. Bobby's on the advisory committee. There's a podcast called the PDH Pod that, to the best of my knowledge, does pretty good work.
There's all kinds of stuff out there.
There's a very passionate community, the best community.
I'd say PDH Homebase also has a Discord, which is a big old place where everyone comes to chat about the format and stuff. But there's a lot of places out there. There's a subreddit, Facebook group. I think links to all that is on pdhhomebase.com. And then it's just about getting in one place, and then you'll find your way to the rest. And I myself, I'm just pretty much on Twitter at Derek Dear Reader, and I'm happy to field questions or point you in the right direction if you need help with anything.
Well, thank you so much for hanging out with us and talking to us about Pauper Commander. So we will have links to all of those fun things in the description below, so be sure to check those out. And I think now it's time for us to play a game.
Play a little Pauper Magic.
Yeah.
That's right.
All right, let's do it. Shuffle up and play.
Sounds
We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bungus, are you gonna get your life together while we play this game of Magic?